Ready?
Yep, we're all ready.
This will be the Audit and Government Efficiency Committee meeting for, thank you, Officer Johnson. Tuesday, January 10th. I'm Councilmember Zine, the chair, joined by Councilmember Paul Koretz, and we are expecting Councilmember Englander to arrive. We have one item agenda. And are there any public comments other than what the agenda item calls for? We will get to those. So the public comment period on any items not on the agenda is closed. We will now go to agenda item number 1. Mr. Clerk, number 1, please.
Item number 1, Office of Finance and Police Commission reports relative to the feasibility of requiring installation of revenue control equipment at all Police Commission permitted auto parks.
And was my staff going to bring up that sign? Okay.
Good afternoon, council members.
Good afternoon.
Richard T. Fank, Executive Director of the Board of Police Commissioners.
Ed Cabrera, Assistant Director, Office of Finance.
Okay.
Would you like me to start, sir?
Please do.
All right, sir. In response to the motion that was presented by Councilmember Zine and some subsequent motions, a staff report was completed by my staff and authored by myself, approved by the Board of Police Commissioners, which we transmitted to you in October of 2011. And the basic question is revenue control equipment feasible for all parking lots that are permitted by the Police Commission? Simple answer is yes. It is feasible to do it. Then you get down to the policy of those lots that should have equipment. And in our research, and I clearly do not pretend to be an expert in parking lot management, parking lot devices, or any of that, but in looking at the research, we have a number of lots currently in the city that are already controlled by revenue control equipment. They operate in a number of ways. One, you would pull into a lot, and your car goes up, you push the button, you get a ticket out. When you get done with your transaction for the day, you could go to an automated device where you would put that ticket in, you pay, get a ticket. When you leave, you put the new ticket into the device, the arm goes up, or you go to a cash situation, you pay cash, and the attendant will raise the arm and you leave. There are some other lots that have different types of revenue control equipment. What we're focused in and looking at this is what we tend to call, and again, our definition would be a surface lot. A lot that is typically in the downtown core or somewhere else in the city that is infill within other areas of the city. Office buildings, it's pavement, it is zoned parking, it is used for parking. There could be multiple entrances. We have some lots in the downtown core that you can enter from 4 different directions. Streets on each side could be one way, so it has to have multiple entrance exits for people to be able to use the lot and to leave the lot. Those become more difficult to revenue control equip because if you were going to limit ingress and egress, then you would have to block off some of those exits. If you were to put articulating arms that we're all familiar with at parking lots at each of those entrances and exits, the costs for those are quite frankly somewhat cost prohibitive. Our staff, again, we don't pretend to be experts in reaching out to vendors that sell this type of equipment. A simple 1 lane in, 1 lane out articulated arm system is about $50,000 at least per lane. So with that, and that you'd have to have construction costs, et cetera. And some of those lots today would be a parking lot, and in a year could be developed into an office type complex. So for those type of lots, the situation becomes, is that a cost prohibitive business situation for them to have to make that infrastructure installment for something that ultimately would be turned into another use? As we went through this evaluation of processes, the simple question was asked is, I've seen situations where individuals at parking lots and other type of service industries, I first realized it flying back from vacation on an airplane. And
you had a vacation?
I did, sir. You let me take one this year. But
the last one for a long time.
the attendant would take your credit card or your ATM card, scan it, and give you a receipt for the product.
Yeah.
Why can't we do that in some of these smaller lots, smaller parking spaces? In working through the LA Parking Association had a demonstration of those type of devices, learned that they're used throughout various parking areas within the County of Los Angeles, and they have become somewhat of a portable device that is able to be utilized in that way. Those devices operate very similar to what you would see when you turn a rental car in. You can show a credit card. If they don't have the credit card in the device, it'll print out a receipt. So you could take ATM, you could take credit card, or you could certainly take cash. They do have some complexities working at lots that are not flat rate, those lots that are incremental lots where you would pay per 15-minute increments or half-hour increments, because that device would have to have some of those calibrations, and I don't know if that can occur. But if you look at those lots and you had those lots flat rated rather than incremented, and let's say you made a lot $20 instead of $10 for the first 15 minutes, $5 every 15 minutes afterwards, and now you're at $20 anyway. Make it flat rate at $20, be able to use the handheld equipment. You could use credit card, ATM, or cash. We would have the ability to have a tracking flow of all that data that is captured in that device. So that comes down, I think, to the policy issue for your honorable body to think about, is the policy of requiring hard installed equipment in every parking lot in the city and the cost that goes with that to the industry and the benefits of that, versus giving an option for some operators based on the size of their lots to utilize the handheld devices rather than hardwired equipment for a better business model. I would also like to talk about what we're doing on enforcement now, because I think that's important to understand. We identified through the Office of Finance, we received a listing of those delinquent operators who had permits that were due to be renewed on January 1st. The list that we were given was of 11 operators. Those 11 operators were sent letters, and to the best information I have as of this morning, all 11 operators paid all parking tax and business tax current. We also now have a process in place that anyone who applies for a business license, an auto park license through the Police Commission, before we issue that license, we contact the Office of Finance to make sure they're current on all property tax, on all parking occupancy tax and all business tax they owe the city. So no one gets a business license from us to operate as an auto park unless all of their taxes are current with the City of Los Angeles. And that was effective back in November. We began that process. And from what I have been told by my staff, and my staff has been informed by the Office of Finance staff, that has really reduced the delinquent operators who have been out there operating on licenses that were valid, that they did not pay their taxes on. So from that perspective, we feel good about that. We are also continuing on with our proactive enforcement. As we identify operators that do not have permits, we shut them down, we make arrests, or we release them on site, we seize the money, and we prosecute them. For those operators who do that and then they wish to come in and apply for a permit, they cannot get a permit. We will not issue a permit to an operator that we have shut down for a year. We will make those operators wait for a year. So there has to be a consequence for operating without a permit. We also have, working with the Office of Finance, on the cases of revocation that have come forward. We recently, I believe it was in November, were successful in revocation of one large operator in the city, revoking, I believe it was 7 of their lots. And those 7 lots are still shut down today. And if that operator attempts to apply for those 7 lots again, they would have to wait a year before they get reinstated at a staff level. If they would appeal that to the police review panel, then they could appeal that to the panel. But from a staff level, we are not renewing lot operators who have been delinquent or who have been revoked. And that's our new enforcement posture, and we believe it's working fairly well. So that's where we are at. We are able to do pretty much the things I've talked about with our current ordinance, although we do not have an ordinance that requires revenue control equipment. If the council was desirous of doing that, you would have to implement some type of ordinance to require whatever type of equipment that you all would decide would be the best in the interest of the city. And that would conclude my part of the presentation.
Thank you.
I know Ed has some comments also to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chief. And I'm very pleased to hear that the City of Los Angeles has gotten serious with this issue. While we want to be business friendly and we welcome business to come to Los Angeles and make a profit and continue to expand and hire people, etc., there is that issue to pay what you are lawfully required to pay. And when it comes to the business license, the property tax, the 10% tax on parking that they collect that is owed the people of Los Angeles that they sometimes don't pay, and we've had to go through a lot of pain to get that. This committee, and two of us on this committee are still working with the Los Angeles Police Department as reserve officers, and my colleague, Mr. Koretz, believes that people should follow the rules and the law, but this has been a situation that has gone way too long where it wasn't addressed by the city of Los Angeles. And there are legitimate parking lot folks here, and I see some of them in the audience, and I'm glad to see that they're here. The fact is, we come up with this because there were people who didn't want to follow the rule. People that didn't want to pay the city of Los Angeles the 10% tax that they were collecting and holding and keeping, and then trying to work out some deal with the city where they'd pay a fraction of what they owed and make off with the rest. That, when I heard about that, was absolutely outrageous. So I appreciate the fact that it's gotten more serious, that the 11 that weren't current are now current. Maybe they've understood that we're very serious about what we want to do. And to the Office of Finance, the responsibility of the Office of Finance is collect the revenue. And I think the Office of Finance has been derelict for a long time. I'm not picking on you, sir, but the Office of Finance has been derelict for a long time, not collecting and not bringing forward this type of information. Because if we look at this parking lot situation, and then we look at all the other fees that are due, and we're not collecting those dollars, that's why we have a huge deficit. That's why we forecast other huge deficits. That's why the radio talk show hosts are on the radio waves talking about how we're not fixing the potholes and let the city deteriorate. So we just need to do what we need to do in a proper legal fashion, still be business friendly, but the finance needs to be collected. That's what obviously runs the city. So let's hear from the representative from the Office of Finance, and then I've got some questions along with my colleagues, and then we've got a public speaker. But I want to thank the folks that are here on this very, very expensive subject. If we're talking about installation and the parking lots, we're talking about up to $170,000. So take it away, sir.
Sure. Ed Cabrera, Assistant Director, Office of Finance. First, I just wanted to address the comments that the chair has made regarding finance's role. We respectfully disagree. Basically, finance has gone back through dating to 2004, 2005, where we did work very cooperatively and proactively with the Controller's Office to pursue litigation with one major scufflaw parking lot operator. So we have been aware of the problem. We've also worked cooperatively with the City Attorney's Office as well as Mr. T-Fank's staff in terms of advancing proposals to tighten up the consequences for operators that are delinquent. Dating back to 2008, we did propose, and thankfully the council and the policymakers did pass an amendment to the LA Municipal Code that called for the revocation of police permits if a taxpayer was delinquent. Again, finance was the lead on that, and we did work cooperatively with the other departments that I mentioned to ensure that that passed and that got implemented. As Mr. T-Fank indicated, the revocation program has brought forth several scufflaw operators to ensure that their permits have been revoked. We've also worked with the City Attorney's Office on major litigation and have worked with the City Attorney's Office to ensure that settlements were acted upon, and there is still litigation ongoing in some of these situations. So we do understand the importance of collections, but I would note for the record that Office of Finance has been very proactive in taking several steps and recommending several steps. One of the reasons that we're here is that finance
Let me stop for a moment. I remember a meeting we had with Mr. T-Fank commented, along with the finance, that there was no communication between the departments, that issue of permits being issued, that the department wasn't notified when they were derelict. We finally resolved those issues.
Yes,
when I talk about being aggressive, the city's been around for over 200 years. This should have been done a long, long time ago and not done in the 2008, 2004 series. So the fact that you folks are talking benefits everybody. But I look at the police department as providing public safety for the people of Los Angeles. When crime goes up, we blame the police department. When crime goes down, we commend the police department. when I look at the Department of Finance, they're the entity in the city of Los Angeles to collect the revenues to run the city. So I understand you trying to justify it, but I've been a critic of that department for a long time because I haven't seen the revenues collected in a timely manner. And I know the city attorney's office goes through litigation, and if a person owes $1 million, they settle for $250,000. See, that to me is outrageous. If someone owes money and they don't pay it, we don't give them a break. If they owe $1 million, we don't give them $250,000, we charge them $2 million. Fees and assessments on top of that. So I understand you defending your department, but I'm a critic of the department. I'm going to remain a critic of the department until I can see those revenues collected. If I don't pay my taxes, if I don't pay my car registration, I'm going to be derelict. And there's a lot of derelict out there, not to cast aspersions upon those legitimate people who are paying the fees so the city can run proper. But I respect the fact you're defending your department, but I am a critic. I'm going to remain a critic until I'm convinced that they're doing everything they can to collect every single dollar to keep this city running and not have these liabilities that are outrageous where people criticize us in elective office for not doing our job. So we can debate that later, but my concern is you are the sole department of this city that's collecting those huge amounts of revenues, and a couple of displays, $23 million, and we talk about the issue, how many cops that puts on the street, how much public safety that does. Well, you know, I put it down low, Mitch, so you could see it. Thank you.
So now we know how you spend your Christmas vacation.
That's it. Anyway, so this illustration is simply to show what caused my outrage, because that's a whole lot of money to provide a whole bunch of services. And again, if the police department had crime going up, I'd have Mr. Takebank here on the hot seat. Unfortunately, he doesn't have to be there today. So, go ahead.
If I may just finish my comment.
Please, yes.
Again, to demonstrate the action that we've taken, we've instituted a lien program, a tax lien program, where we are going after and attaching liens on both real property and personal property.
And how long have you been doing that? How long have you
We've been doing that since December of 2010.
Okay.
Prior to that, we instituted a top debtors program where we have identified these operators as well as business tax and other tax payers that are delinquent in an attempt to collect revenue, and those programs have been very successful. So we have taken a very decisive series of steps.
But see, that's my point. You're doing it now, and I commend you for that. The liens, I think, are great. It's a great tool to use. I'm just saying we should have been doing that a long time ago. That's my concern, is we started last year, 2 years ago. And I remember the city attorney, all due respect, when the city attorney would come to council and say, well, we have a settlement, these people owe $10 million, they're willing to give us $1 million, we're going to write off $9 million. That's one of the concerns I have. So the fact you folks are getting aggressive is great. People aren't paying, put a lien, put a seizure, lock them up, whatever it takes to get their attention, and not to show disrespect for the folks that are paying, because if I'm paying and you're paying and someone else isn't paying, there's got to be consequences to those that aren't paying. That's my issue. If we all pay, we'll be fine. And then we have to have severe sanctions against those that, for whatever reason, try to slide through the system. And we know that they've changed the family names, they've done this, they played every game imaginable. So the lien's a great idea. I appreciate that. That's a great opportunity. It means we're serious, and that's what my focus is. So continue, please.
Okay. Which brings us to some of the consequences that you're asking for and which we've recommended. With regards to the revenue control equipment, number one, we do commend and recognize the cooperation of the Los Angeles Parking Association, their input that they provided in the review of the topic concerning RCE. We also thank Mr. Teefank and his staff, as well as the Board of Police Commissioners for the report and the acknowledgement that revenue control equipment is a needed component of the compliance aspect. And I would point out that compliance, yes, finance is the tax collector. However, the parking occupancy tax is a dual item where you have both a tax component as well as a regulatory component. Yeah. Office of Finance is not a regulatory agency, so we don't have the ability to shut a business down or to pull a police permit. That's why we have worked with Mr. Tiefank's office, and we have advanced several steps to have those permits revoked.
And they can do that?
Yes, they can, from the regulatory side, correct.
Okay. And you guys are talking to make sure that happens?
Yes, we have been.
Okay.
We have been for multiple years, sir.
Good.
But with the one area that we do disagree with the report approved by the Board of Police Commissioners is the requirement that the revenue control equipment, that the option be given that it could either be permanent, portable, or stationary revenue control equipment. And we firmly believe, as a tax compliance agency, that permanent revenue control equipment is necessary. The recommendation that we made to this body, as well as to the full council, was that delinquent taxpayers be mandated to install permanent revenue control equipment. And I understand that there is a cost that could be considered to be prohibitive. However, that would serve as a deterrent to ensure that there is a level playing field created for those parking lot operators that are compliant, that are doing the correct thing in terms of collecting the city's money and remitting it on a timely basis, versus those operators that are acting as scufflaws and that are delinquent and either have no intention to remit the funds to the Office of Finance, to the city, thus gaining a competitive advantage over those that are compliant. We firmly believe that permanent control equipment is needed, and that's for the simple fact that, yes, the examples that Mr. Tiefank provided, that portable equipment could capture credit card transactions, we agree with that. However, the reality is that a very large majority of the transactions on, let's say, surface lots or non-monthly parking lots is cash. Those cash transactions often escape collection, recording, and quite honestly, a portable device handed to an attendant still has the human element, still has the element that if either the attendant or the parking lot operator are not in full compliance, that they still will circumvent any capability of that device to record the transaction. We believe that requiring and providing the option of portable revenue control equipment simply provides the illusion of some type of controls, but in actuality, it does not provide the Office of Finance with data if transactions are not going to be recorded.
See, now you sound like me. Really, I mean, that's what it sounds like. That's what I'm saying. Are you saying it for the scofflaw, the ones that don't, or for everybody? Are you just saying the people that try to deceive and don't follow the rules? Are you saying it for everyone, or just those that have committed the violations?
Our original recommendation was that the permanent revenue control equipment be mandated for the scufflaws, for the delinquent parking lot operators. I believe Councilmember Parks asked for a feasibility study if the revenue control equipment could be applied to all operators.
Right.
Again, that would be a policy decision. Finance's recommendation is that, at a minimum, the permanent revenue control equipment be mandated for all delinquent and scufflaw parking lot operators.
But not for everybody? Okay.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to understand that.
If I could just respond to that, I think it's important to understand that the universe of scofflaws today is a very small universe.
But
And
they seem to keep on
they
doing
exist.
it.
But they do exist, but they are a small universe of individuals.
Yeah.
The position that we believe is more viable to enforce is that we put the sanction on the front end, not the back end. If you operate a lot today without a permit, and we shut you down, you cannot apply for that permit for that lot for 1 year.
Right.
Why we want to incentivize somebody to be able to operate and be a scofflaw, and then take whatever they took from us, and then say, okay, you're a scofflaw, and now we'll let you put the equipment and you can operate. I think we need to put the sanction at the front end rather than the back end. And so if we have a deterrent effect through, if you're a scofflaw and you operate in the city of Los Angeles, you're not going to be able to operate once we discover you. And I believe that whether it is a articulated arm that goes up with someone in the guard shack or the gate shack, someone can push that button and somebody can drive in and let someone park for free. The handheld equipment also has all the auditing backware to help be able to go in and identify the type of payment, the vehicle that came in, the time the vehicle came in. All that data can be captured. So I think that, again, from our perspective, we're the enforcement arm of the permit. And what we believe is the best leverage we have is to deny you a permit.
Right.
And if we can deny you a permit because, one, you owe the city money, which is what we're doing now, or we deny you a permit because we catch you operating without a permit and we shut you down and we make you wait 1 year before you can apply for another permit.
But we're talking about those that have been in business who haven't violated, who paid their taxes, who paid their fees. We're not talking about installing the permanent in those. I'm trying to understand what you're...
Well, the part of the motion was to the feasibility for everyone.
Well, that's what Mr. Parks' motion was.
Yeah, so again, we're responding...
So what do you think Mr. Parks' motion should apply to all, whether they've been in business for 10 years?
Well, we would hope that we reduce the scofflaw universe down to so small that then you really have an ineffective revenue control equipment ordinance.
So you're not talking about just scofflaws, you're talking about everyone.
Again, as a policy for the policymakers, I see that you have three choices, quite frankly. One, do what we're doing today. Two, implement revenue control equipment only for scofflaws. And three, implement revenue control equipment for all operators.
What do we do with those operators who've been in business and have a good reputation and they don't cheat the taxpayers and they run a legitimate shop? What about those? Is there any kind of positive for them, or are they going to be pushed into that with everyone else?
Well, I think that if you were, from the conversations that we've had with the Office of Finance over the years, what the Office of Finance would benefit from them is they would have an audit trail. Even though they've been paying, are they paying the appropriate amount?
I see.
With the audit trail, you would have that. So again, that's another piece of that. Yeah, again, the parking operators that we've dealt with through the Parking Association and Mr. Hindle and his colleagues, I mean, they're first-class people. They want to run the bad operators out of town and get them in compliance.
Same thing with the taxi cabs. You got the bandit taxi cab, the same deal.
And again, I think that the requirement that was given to us as staff is to prepare a report. Right. Which is what we did. So I see the three recommendations. One, do what we're doing now. Two, implement revenue control equipment on scofflaws only. Or three, implement it on all. And those are the three policy questions. Right. At the end of the day. We're going to continue to do what we're doing today, no matter what decision you make. And that is, as I said, we'll enforce against those that don't have permits. We check with finance on making sure that everyone is current on all their taxes able to the city before we give them a permit, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay. No, that's good. I just want to find out, I don't want to punish, my goal is not to punish those that have been legitimate operators and they've done everything in the proper fashion versus, and I compare this to the taxi industry. We've got bandit taxi cabs that run around stealing business from legitimate cabs that pay their insurance and pay their fees. To me, it's the same situation. I don't want to penalize a legitimate operator who's been legitimate, who's been following the rules. I understand capturing the information versus those that are trying to rip us off. I mean, and that comes to my law enforcement nature. You're ripping us off, we'll do everything we can to shut you down and take your house and your car and everything that's left. I have no compassion for people who are stealing or cheating, but I understand what you're saying is you're talking about those that aren't on that side of the fence. We have to have some concern not to be negative and cost them up to $170,000+. So I see where you're both coming from.
If they're a scofflaw, again, the perspective
there's no passion for those. There's no compassion for those.
I don't care if you put $175,000 in the ground and continue to operate. You still owe the city money. You cheated the city out of money. Go do your business somewhere else.
Yeah, those are the scofflaws. That's, I think, a category we all agree on, that we need to do everything we can. And putting the liens and things, which is an aggressive way to go, which I totally support. You know, do it right, and you don't have any problems. Will you finish? Do you have anything else? He was responding. He was jumping in. Go ahead. You've been very.
I apologize. I wanted to clarify that.
We've been very, shall we say, argumentative to this. But go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add, finance does not view the requirement that mandatory revenue control equipment of a permanent nature be installed. We don't view that as some type of incentive for scufflaws to operate or incentivizing scufflaw activity. As a matter of fact, we simply view that as a deterrent. One of the comments that you heard today is that, well, installation of revenue control equipment of a permanent nature may be prohibitive. Well, quite honestly, I view that as a deterrent for an operator to act outside the bounds of normal business activity, or quite honestly, in committing fraud. We do have to point out the parking occupancy tax is not revenue that belongs to the operator. That's revenue that belongs to the city. It's not coming out of the operator's pockets. It's coming out of their the users of their locations. So when you go and park, when I go and park, that's money coming out of my pocket. That's due to the city. So we certainly don't believe and agree with the statement that mandatory permanent revenue control equipment incentivizes scufflaw activity. On the other hand, it should serve as a deterrent for those delinquent operators. And unfortunately, while we have communicated, and we have been communicating for multiple years with CID to ensure that permits are either revoked or not issued at all, and we've been working very cooperatively, as Mr. Teefank indicated, on the renewal of permits. One thing we have to state is that there are operators that simply, once they're discovered operating illegally or they're delinquent, they shut down, form another entity, move to another location, and they'll operate without permits. We also refer parking lots that we discover that are not permitted, which again is a regulatory issue, to CID so that CID can shut them down. So if all operators were operating on good intent, yes, revenue control equipment of a permanent nature would not be needed. But unfortunately, what we found is that whether permits are issued or not, you will have a certain segment of the parking lot industry that are operating at any particular given time without a permit and outside the bounds of both the tax ordinances as well as the regulatory ordinances. Which brings me to the second area that finance had recommended, and that was a parking tax collection bond requirement. Finance still believes very firmly that the model utilized by the city and county of San Francisco to require mandated parking tax collection bonds is something that this committee and the full council should issue instructions to the city attorney to work with Office of Finance, CID, as well as CAO, to draft an ordinance to require mandatory parking tax bond. That will ensure that you're ahead of the game. The revenue control equipment, the pulling of permits, or not issuing permits, yes, those are our tools, but we believe that the bond requirement puts the city ahead of the game in that an operator who comes into the city, wants to operate a parking lot location, has to provide a parking lot collection bond, which would enable the city to either go after the parking lot operator or the surety company that issued the bond to recover any delinquent taxes. That is a requirement that San Francisco has, as well as revenue control equipment for parking lot locations. So we believe that both the permanent revenue control equipment for delinquent parking lot operators, as well as a bond requirement for all operators, puts the city ahead of the game and allows the city the necessary tools, the actual tools to collect.
Excellent. I think that bond's a marvelous idea. The issue of those, we talk about they collect a 10% tax and they're holding that tax. Have we ever gone out and arrested them for grand theft, stealing city money, since that's city money they're collecting? Have we ever done any arrests such as that?
There have been some cases involving one of the large operators that's no longer in business that the city criminally and civilly prosecuted for theft. But the recent operators, that has not been the case, because the money that we're able to get at the time we go there is for the money for that day, and they have no obligation to remit that, I think, until, 30 days after they collected it? I'm not sure.
Yes, it's a monthly remittance.
A monthly remittance.
So our effort is operating without a business permit. is what we'll go
Do
out.
we actually take them into custody and book them?
We will if they have no ID. If they have ID, we'll give them a field release. We will take the money. Again, the issue there, you're dealing with the guy that's the attendant, guy or gal that's the attendant. You want to get to the operator. So we'll take those individuals and we'll attempt to find out who put them there and that type of situation. But mostly you're not dealing with the individual who actually owns the lot and is going to make all the money.
So you own the lot, and Ed leases the lot from you and runs the parking lot. Do we go after the owner of the property or the one whose name the lot's leased in? So he owns the lot, but you're leasing the lot, running the parking lot.
I would defer to City Attorney. I believe Beverly Cook from City Attorney's Office is here. If it's regarding the tax, we can only go after the particular operator.
The operator of the lot.
Correct.
Okay, so someone could own it, they're collecting rent, since someone owns that lot collecting rent, and then someone else is running that lot, collecting the revenue, not paying the tax. So there's no obligation on the person who's owning the property.
Correct. They would have their own tax obligation with regards to the rent. However, with regard to, if they're not operating the lot, let's say, for example, in your scenario, if I'm managing it on behalf of Mr. T-Fank, then yes, we could go after either the manager or the parking lot operator. But if he's
not doing
simply
the
a landlord
Yeah.
and I'm the operator, then there is no standing for the city in terms of tax collection
Right.
to go after the landlord.
I can understand the fact that some person has the lot, someone comes in and wants to use that lot, and next to the pantry, for example, down on Fig, there was something there, they tore it down, they built a parking lot, and I remember when they were building that parking lot, and I was wondering who owns the property. I guess the guy who owns the property isn't the one who decides to lease that parking lot out to somebody someone's collecting rent, whatever that rate is, and then someone else is running that business off that lot. So I just want to see the technical issue, if there's something we can do for that. Was there anything else from finance?
No, just basically, again, we just want to reiterate that we firmly believe that the permanent revenue control equipment for delinquent tax parking lot operators is necessary, as well as we respectfully ask that the council and this committee issue instructions to city attorney to draft an ordinance mandating parking occupancy tax bond.
Okay. Before we get to city attorney, you were here first, so you go first, and you were here last, so Mr. Englander, you're last.
Okay, yeah, I have a bunch of questions. First of all, how do we avoid the problem of the scofflaws that shut down and move? Does the bond by itself handle that problem totally? And the idea also of shutting someone down for a year if they've been a scofflaw, does that just shut the operator down, or does that prevent the owner from leasing it to somebody else and letting somebody else operate that site for a year?
I'll answer your last question first, sir. The operator would be shut down, not the landlord. The owner of the land could lease that land to someone else to operate it. It is the individual who the permit is issued to.
So it doesn't mean that we lose that as a resource.
That's correct.
We just lose the scofflaw and
That's
the landlord can install somebody else. Does the bond piece, which I've heard suggested before, and I think it's a great idea, does that eliminate the possibility of people leaving and opening up something somewhere else, but leaving us holding the bag?
I don't believe it eliminates the problem of someone opening up and shutting down. However, what it does address is we will be able to go after both the operator or the surety company we'd be able to go after the operator for the full amount of their delinquency. We'd be able to go after the surety company for the full amount of the bond, assuming up to the delinquency, the parking occupancy tax delinquency. So that addresses an operator who opens up, becomes delinquent, and they haven't paid. We could go after that by recovering on the bond. Certainly, it doesn't stop them from opening up somewhere else. However, again, they wouldn't be able to be permitted without submitting a bond. So again, we would have that covered in terms of tax collection. From a regulatory aspect, certainly CID still would have to go through the permitting process, But again, as Mr. Tefek has indicated, we have improved communication, and we are working in sharing data and ensuring that we have the authority to not issue a renewal or a permit based on the approval of CID if the taxpayer is delinquent.
How much of a piece of the problem would that have solved in the case of our largest delinquent parking operator who owed millions of dollars and that we criminally prosecuted? Would they have had a bond on every lot and been covered?
If this program was in place, yes, the requirement would be that each lot, there would be a bond requirement. So depending on the level of the estimated tax and the historical gross receipts for that lot, the bond would be set at that level. So in theory, we would cover tax that is delinquent, and we would have a better opportunity to recover that versus what we have in place now.
And also, I know one of the problems historically has been this is a cash business, and some people are able to get away with that more easily. Are we looking at any requirements to require lots to at least provide the ability to use credit cards? Without a doubt, there are some places that remain cash only because they desire that ability to hide some of the money.
That would be a question for city attorney.
Do we have anyone here that can answer that?
We'll get the city attorney after.
Okay. Also, some of these items are rather expensive, and I wonder whether we've looked at a question of size. For instance, the idea I just mentioned, requiring credit cards, it might not be realistic if you have 5 or 10 spaces. Eminently realistic if you have a couple hundred spaces in the surface lot. So same thing with some of the equipment. If you had 10 spaces and you were a scofflaw, it still would be ridiculous to ask you to put in a $50,000 piece of equipment. You might as well just say, shut down, don't use this property for parking. So I'm wondering whether we've looked at a cutoff where it's practical. Certainly if we're looking at a $50,000 piece of equipment versus a handheld, whether we've looked at the number of spaces and whether that's practical.
I can tell you, sir, that we looked at that. A lot has to have 8 or more spaces to be required to have a auto park permit. 7 or less, you're not required to have an auto park permit. 8 is the number and above. So if you were a lot of 25 spaces and you're filling in on the daytime parking, shall we say, and you were to require revenue control equipment in the ground, as you indicated, that the cost of that equipment could be so prohibited to put that in-ground equipment that operator would just shut that lot down and just leave it as a vacant lot. We looked at the inventory that we have available to us based on information that is provided to us by the operators of the auto parks. If you'll give me just 1 second, I will look for it in my documents here. 0 to 50 lots, there are approximately 304. 50 to 100, 231. 100 to 150, 108. Then after you go over the 150 to 200, I'm sorry, 150 to 200 is 71. You start getting into double-digit lots until you get to the 500 and 1,000 size lots. So your smaller lots, your 0 to 50 is 304, 50 to 100, 231, 100 to 150, 108, and 150 to 271. They're your smaller inventoried lots. Again, I've used the term surface lots. You can go downtown, you'll see them, small infill lots. There are a number of them that you could drive by today, and in a year there could be putting a building on those lots. Those are the kinds of things that I looked at from a practical perspective, requiring an operator to put in-ground equipment at the cost it would be prohibitive. You might see that lot just become a blight and nothing be there until someone developed it. And that, again, is from the perspective of requiring everyone to have handhelds. If you were to require the scofflaws to have requiring everyone to have revenue control equipment. If you were to require scofflaws, I think we have lowered that universe down to the scofflaws now, to where if we do a good job in revocation of permits, we expedite that revocation process, because now it can take 9 to 10 months to revoke somebody's permit through the process that the Office of Finance must go through until we get to a panel. So let's say that I'm going to be one of these scofflaws, and I've been paying you really good, but all of a sudden I've hit a different business model, and now I'm not going to pay you. And my average payment to you is $5,000 a month. I can operate 9 to 10 months at $5,000 a month not paying you, and then walk away from you. What we need to look at is reducing that time, so we reduce our liability on scofflaws, and then we make it more difficult for scofflaws to operate to even get a permit, and then we've reduced that opportunity for the scofflaw to exist in the city. So there's a multiple
Is that part of the
approach.
process? Are you anticipating ways to reduce the period of revocation hearing?
Well, that's the Office of Finance has. Their processes they have to go through by ordinance, and Ed is far more versed than those, except I know that we both share the frustration of it takes that long to get it to a police permit review panel for revocation. Then the applicant has a chance to go try and get a writ.
So what I'm asking is anybody looking at how to streamline that?
Well-
And if it's city ordinances that are standing in the way, we obviously could do a cleanup ordinance to make the process more streamlined.
Councilmember, if I may, first of all, Office of Finance has a strike force where we do have a team that are reviewing the monthly remittances or lack thereof of the parking lot operators. So we are on top of it. We are looking at these on a monthly basis, and we are making monthly referrals to CID. So in terms of the process, the actual review and analysis, we are doing this on a monthly basis. What Mr. Tiefank is referring to is the due process requirements of the LA Municipal Code. A taxpayer who is delinquent and has been issued an assessment has the right to a due process two-level hearing. They have a right to a hearing before an assessment review officer. That decision can be appealed before a board of review. So there is a 3 to 4 month, potentially 6 month timeline where a taxpayer has to be afforded their rights to appeal an assessment, and once that process has been exhausted, the assessment becomes final. But we are looking at these cases on a monthly basis. Once that process is final,
The question is there anything you could do to create a different category, perhaps, of taxpayers who have collected taxes and are not remitting them to the city?
we would have to have a discussion with city attorney to see what the due process rights are, whether those can be changed for delinquent taxpayers. I'm not aware in our prior discussions, because we have had those discussions previously. Nothing has popped up, but we certainly can double back with city attorney. I did also want to address two other things. With regards to the revenue control equipment, I would point out that the model that we're looking at is what the city and county of San Francisco has implemented. With regards to revenue control equipment, you mentioned size of the lots, and has anyone taken that into consideration? San Francisco's municipal code and their ordinances do have certain exemptions based on size, based on other considerations, but also the type of revenue control equipment is also dependent upon the size of the lot. So certainly that's an area that, as we move forward, we certainly can consider. But I would also point out that, again, Finance's recommendation is that this requirement of permanent revenue control equipment be mandated for delinquent operators. As the chair advised, there are representatives from the Los Angeles Parking Association here in the audience, and I'm certain that they could attest to the fact that those operators that are in compliance, that are doing the right things, that are reporting on a monthly basis and reporting the correct amount and remitting the correct amount, they're at a competitive disadvantage, because a scufflaw operator can go in, bid a lower amount for a lease, take over that lot, and either underpay or not pay at all. So therefore, the fact that there may be some cost, considerations, again, that's the cost of doing business for these scufflaw operators, if you look at it from that perspective, because if the requirement is limited to delinquent operators, those operators that are in compliance, that are doing the right things, that have the right business model to be competitive, this requirement would not hit them. What we are requesting, though, is that the bond, the mandatory bond requirement, be extended to all operators. That puts the city ahead of the game.
Two other quick questions. What are we doing to try and find operators that aren't in the system? Because I'm told by some good operators that I know that there are more small lots out there that aren't paying taxes and aren't permitted than we probably think. Is there a process to try and locate them? Have we ever considered hiring people on commission to find them and get a percentage of what they turn up in potential tax revenue? What are we doing to track these folks down?
The way that we focus on that from an operating perspective on a non-permitted lot is in a variety of ways. One, we will get information from the field inspectors from the Office of Finance. There are folks who are out in the street. They have a really good sense of the inventory out there, who is permitted. If they see an operator that has just popped up, they will let us know. We will then send our enforcement officers out, our police officers assigned to Commission Investigation Division, and they will take the appropriate enforcement action by arresting and or citing the individuals who are operating. The second way we will do it is our officers, as they are out doing their field inspections for all the variety of permits that they issue and monitor and regulate, they will make periodic inspections of what the lots that they know have a high level of turnover. There are a number of lots in the city that they know are always going to be the same. They don't have issues with those lots. They know the universe is a very small universe of lots that they have to focus on. So that's where they go and direct their efforts. Just like any good police officer, they know where the crime is, and they go there and take the appropriate enforcement action. And we will weekly arrest individuals for operating without permits.
If I may, I'm sorry to interrupt. From a tax perspective, the Office of Finance has a variety of discovery programs. For example, our AB 63 program, since its inception in 2002, has generated over $140 million in new revenue to the city based on the efforts of our staff in identifying operators, parking tax operators, business taxpayers who have not been on the rolls. So we not only have identified that revenue, we've gotten these businesses on the rolls. We have other discovery programs, data sharing programs with a variety of state and county agencies. And we do have also a contractor, the Parking Network, who is out in the field conducting audits, identifying operators that are either not permitted or under remitting. So we are conducting audits of these operators, and we are also providing information and sharing that information with CIDs to ensure that operators that are not permitted are closed down. As Mr. Chief indicated, they do have officers that will go out and make arrests if necessary, and to shut the lots down. So we have been proactive, and I would point out to the chair that since 2000, when Ms. Cristobal took over as General Manager, Office of Finance, our discovery programs have been ramped up, and we've identified thousands, hundreds of thousands of operators, parking business taxpayers, which includes operators that were not registered previously.
Yeah, last question. You have a scofflaw operator, he leaves owing hundreds of thousands of dollars in a lot, finds 4 new partners and opens up another operation elsewhere in the city. Do we catch them? What's our current process if they sort of hide among other participants and continue to engage in the same activities? Do we check the names of all the new owners? Do we halt them if a scofflaw is among them? How do we handle it?
If they are an individual, we'll be able to prevent them from opening. If they are part of a DBA or a corporation, they become incorporated into another entity. That's the catch. They're able to come in and operate in those kind of mechanisms. The situation, though, is if they were able to do that, we would be in close contact and coordination with finance on a monthly basis. They have to pay their POT every 30 days. If they're not paying immediately, we begin enforcement action as quickly as we can on them. We cannot prevent them if they come in as a new entity, new organization, and restructure themselves from applying for a permit.
So there's no way to pierce the corporate veil legally and
But we do know who they are, and so we will focus on those individuals and ensure they don't get, again, that long debt. As I call it, we need to shrink the liability of the city, and we do that by expediting processes. And then if we have a scofflaw, take us for 20 grand, don't take us for 50 or 100. Let's shrink the debt, and that's how we get the 23 million that Councilmember Zine had with the displays. The debt just keeps going and going. We need to shrink that.
As far as piercing the corporate veil, that's something that city attorney has discussed, and they're looking at that. And again, it's not a very easy thing to do legally, but that issue is a topic under review and discussion by city attorney.
They did get Al Capone on income tax evasion.
Yes.
Well, that's all that. Mr. England here.
I'm just riveting discussion, trying to get my arms around all of these little arguments and trying to follow the logic, if you will. And the logic, actually, I started off in one direction until I heard a lot of the explanation and discussion, so I have some details I'd like to get to, but I appreciate all the explanation and the work that's been done. Trying to get into the idea from what I'm walking away with all this is that we've got, I mean, if I can boil it down and simplify a little bit, we've got good operators and some bad operators. The good operators make up, according to the report, roughly 70% that's out there, or 70% belong to the association, if you will, right? Is that correct? Okay. Is what you've got in your report. With that, the good operators aren't a problem, for the most part. They pay their taxes, they're paying their POT, their business tax, etc. It's those few bad operators that we're trying to go after. This started off with a motion on installing permanent monitoring systems, metering systems, auditing systems, accounting systems. And it's morphed into all kinds of other things, into looking at the idea of perhaps a bond, which isn't necessarily on the schedule, but or the agenda. I'd like to see that come back in some kind of form, because I think that's a good idea. I think it was, it morphed also into the idea of perhaps having a bond requirement coupled with a 1-year holding, where if we catch them, they can't renew for a year. I don't know if that's part of the current ordinance or not, or you're proposing that it become part of the new ordinance?
If they currently are revoked, they cannot operate for a year.
Under revocation.
Under revocation, yes.
Under revocation, but if they're operating without a permit. So let's get into that for a second. I'm just trying to follow the logic. So as you stated, there was, if I recall, there were field inspectors by the Office of Finance. If they were out there inspecting, looking for operators that were operating without a permit. Now, if these were people that were leasing a piece of property and parking vehicles on it, they had no permit, there's a good chance they don't have a business license. There's a good chance they're not operating with a DBA or a corporation as well. It's an individual, pretty easy to set up shop on a lot, put out some cones, put out a sign, and charge people to park, particularly for special events, and move around very quickly and easily. They wouldn't be caught in Sacramento with a business tax issue. They wouldn't be caught on the paper trail. They'd be caught by these field inspectors. How many field inspectors does the Office of Finance have out there right now on this issue?
On this particular issue, we don't have dedicated staff on this issue. In terms of in the field.
But it was stated, if I could.
No, those are staff those are in-house that are reviewing the monthly remittances. In terms of our field staff, we probably have about 20 field staff that go out to the field and conduct their not on this.
Okay, that's the only thing we're talking about. I mean, I'm not asking how many apples are on a tree.
No, I understand
Specifically,
that.
we're talking about parking lots. How many parking lots are out there right now, operating legally or illegally? What I'm trying to figure out is why we're trying to put in control measures, perhaps, or that's being proposed for good operators. I walked in absolutely for it. In fact, I had a lot of other ideas that I was floating out there. And I've moved in a completely different direction after hearing the dialogue, the questions from my colleagues, which were fantastic, by the way, because they really drilled down into figuring out where are we at. I didn't know we were going to have static displays as well, so I'm equally impressed.
And they were at the height that you could see.
At my height, yes, thank you. $60 at Kinko's, but I'll just assume save the taxpayer money and verbalize my questions. But having said that, as it relates to this, I see no reason at all to require the good operators who are have passed the audits, who go through the permitting process, that pay their taxes. I mean, it's the old adage of if it moves, tax it. If it stops moving, subsidize it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it parks a car on it, we'll just tax it even more. I mean, I don't understand where we're going with that theory. If they're doing a good job, leave them alone. They're paying business tax, they're paying property tax, they're paying employees, they're doing all these great. That's fantastic. Let's go through the ones that aren't. And that's the $23 million that Zion was talking about. Those are the dollars out there. It was stated that we have a process of field inspectors from the Office of Finance on this issue. What they would do is they would find these operators, and they know who they are. And if we were taking actual minutes, although I know it's being recorded, I would play it back because I believe the transcript would say we know who they are, we follow them around, we know where they set up shop, is what was stated on the record. So with that, if we do, then we take that information and we report it to CID, which is what was stated. CID then deploys LAPD, and according to the report, we make arrests.
That's correct.
And the report does say we have two things we can do. If the report on page 2, the last paragraph says, currently when a non-permitted parking facility is identified, enforcement action is taken by Commission Investigation Division, CID, enforcement section in the form of an arrest for a violation of Los Angeles Municipal Code, or ordering the operator to cease operation and operate until the auto park permit is issued in accordance with the existing ordinance. So right now under revocation, we hold it for 1 year. But if they're operating without a permit, we can make an arrest. How many arrests of individuals, actual arrests, have we made under this? Under page 2, this last paragraph, they're operating non-permitted parking facility. Hold that thought. First question is on CID. You said we actually send people out before it goes to CID with our field inspectors. How many have we identified with a field inspector that were operating without a permit with field inspectors?
Again, I did not specifically say field inspectors. What I indicated is that we have a strike force that they are reviewing the monthly POT remittances. Based on that review and that analysis of the registered businesses, the registered parking
That's all great on
operators.
paper, but that only answers the back office if they're caught on paper because they filed something else legally and that's how they were caught. What I'm talking about is the ones that are setting up shop, which is going to be the bulk of them. If they're not following one law, there's a good chance they're not following many others. So let's assume they're not caught on paper in a computer, and we don't have 20 bean counters, if you will, working Monday through Friday in front of a computer looking to match names up, but they're setting up shop and they're out there every week or weekend. These are what the idea of field inspectors are. You'd indicated we've got 20 field inspectors out there, but they haven't made a single arrest.
They don't have the authority to make a
They haven't referred one to CID, which then went to LAPD to make a single arrest.
No, that's not what I said. We do have not only approximately 20 field employees. However, again, they are not assigned specifically to one tax. The business tax is the predominant tax that the city administers. So our field employees are out there trying to identify businesses that are not registered across the gamut, from business tax to parking occupancy tax to transient occupancy tax and so forth. So we don't have a unlimited amount of staff that we can simply say we're going to throw X number of resources solely to one tax. We administer business tax, which is well over
$23 million.
$400,000.
This was up to $23 million. $23 million, is that what was estimated at one time?
Correct.
And outstanding collections and illegal operations?
Correct.
You're telling me we don't have one staff member to go out and look for $23 million? We'll come back to that.
That's not what I said, sir.
A contractor, well, you'd mentioned a contractor. We have a contractor out there?
We have a contractor that's the parking network, and they conduct field surveillance. They conduct field surveillance of parking lot operators. They go out and do car counts. They're identifying lots that are not permitted, lots that are not registered, and they do refer that to our staff, and we make those referrals to
So it's
Mr.
basically
Tefank's staff.
referral type, okay.
Excuse me?
A referral type.
In terms of revocation or referral for closure if they're not permitted.
Okay. So what do we have in place where, and obviously it's pretty easy for one of these operators, if they're not permitted, as it was stated, to set up shop overnight, whether it's even doing it legally and without a permit, and I say legally by simply filing a DBA, or actually going after articles of incorporation, which you can do online at 3 o'clock in the morning for $400. LegalZoom.com. Check that out. So with that, it's one thing to go after if they're doing those things. If they're operating without a permit, so we have nothing to revocate because they don't have a permit to begin with. Do we have a way to lock into anything on that property and saying that property was being used illegally and therefore cannot be used for that purpose? Or is there an ordinance option we can change, something in the ordinance or the code we can change from zoning where we can condition or add some kind of penalty that says you cannot use it for that purpose for 1 year since it was being used illegally for that purpose? Is there anything we can do with that, or can we research that and come back and look at it?
I can tell you that, to the best of my knowledge, we have nothing in place today, and it follows a similar line that Councilmember Zion, I believe, asked about. If I'm leasing land from a individual who owns the land and I default on my parking occupancy tax, is the owner of the land liable for that? I think it would follow the same theory, but we can certainly get an answer to that, but I don't have the direct answer.
I'm not sure if it is or not.
But what we do arrest, physically take into custody, and/or cite and release at the scene the individual who is operating a lot.
Right. And how many of those have we actually arrested?
I'm going to give you a guess, sir, and that would be, I would say we do at least a half a dozen a week.
That we've arrested for operating
Absolutely.
illegally?
Arresting meaning giving a citation and/or booking them, and then releasing them.
Fricking them? Okay.
Absolutely.
Fine.
I would say at least a half a dozen a week.
Okay.
And we have 2 officers. You asked.
But none from our field inspectors. These are all from LAPD officers?
LAPD, they don't have authority to do that, sir.
No, I know, but they refer.
Yeah. But the officers that we have within CID, we have a number of police officers that have varied responsibilities. I have 2 police officers dedicated full-time to nothing but parking lot enforcement.
And
they then utilize the resources of their cohorts in CID when they go out and do operations.
Along those lines, I remember working LAPD.
Feel free to interrupt me anytime, Chairman.
Right along the question goes with this, is where we had LAPD Vice working along ABC joining together. Have we ever used that opportunity to take finance and LAPD and work a joint operation?
Yes.
You'd have that joint authority on both sides of the fence?
We'll use them, we'll have them go out with us when we do lot inspections to make sure the permits and all the documents that they have are correct.
Okay.
We've done that with the staff from Office of Finance.
Let me drill down one more level if I could. So in suggesting that, first of all, in comparing it to San Francisco, I know we're just in completely and entirely different than the way that city and county is set up, but there's some good initiatives they've certainly taken. The proposal sounds like it's sort of morphing into, perhaps, going into the idea of going after the ones that have been revocated. I'd like to see that expanded to include ones that have ever been caught operating without a permit, to include that they, if possible, I think the idea that Mr. Zine had brought up about the bonding, and both Mr. Kretz and Mr. Zine brought that up, bonding, the handheld devices. I mean, they'd throw the kitchen sink at the bad operators. Anything we can. But the question becomes: is it tied to, if it's a DBA, is it tied to the individual for the year? Is it tied to, if it's a corporation, obviously that's a legal entity, and so not quite sure if we can go after the officers then of the corporation, so they can't set up another shop the next day. Any officer who's registered on that corporation that sets up a parking lot or applies for a permit, they would fall under the same conditions or restrictions, an officer of that corporation. And they could have 3 officers. They could have president, vice president. They could have a treasurer. It could be a number of different people attached to that. But if you're an officer of the corporation, if it's a corporation, tied to those same conditions, I mean, those are the things I think we're looking at and really going after and listening to the discussion. after those people who are bad operators and not trying to put this minimum $15,000 a year, those are the handhelds, as I calculate it, on good operators who are following the letter and the spirit of the law, passing our audits, having inspectors come out. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But if we can go after that $23 million, and as you said, shrink that pool down, go after them with everything we've got. I'd like to hear more about what field inspectors should or could be doing, and look at a holistic approach and going after the bad operators.
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, where's the general manager? Why isn't she here for this hearing?
She was out of the office and training, sir.
Okay. Because it is a very...
Field inspector training?
No, CPA training, continuing education.
Another idea that came up regarding the lots, when you go to a restaurant, they've got a sign in the window, A, B, C. Now, if you go to a restaurant and it says C or D, you're probably not going to go in there. For F, they're not going to be in operation. We have taxi cabs that have a seal on the door. Have we ever thought about, with the police department, Office of Finance, that those lots that are running legit, we'd have some kind of a posting that, like OPGs, like the police garage, you have an auto club truck, a AAA, then you got the bandit tow trucks. Have we ever thought about doing something on the sign to show that instead of Greg's parking or Richard's parking, that we have some kind of identifying sign that says they're in good compliance with the city? So we have maybe, if you look at the taxi cabs, you see a taxi cab with a city seal, they're paying their fees, we know they're legit. You see another taxi cab with no city seal on the door, they're the bandits who we arrest. Another idea along these lines...
Or the Z-Man emblem.
Yeah, thank you. Is that we do something where they would have some kind of a seal on that sign, that marquee, that your folks would be identified and the police department would identify, and people would say, you know what, that's a legitimate parking lot versus the bandit lots. That's an idea we could explore.
I don't know if there's a requirement for that type of...
No, I know it's not, but I'm thinking we could do something to...
Absolutely makes sense, so we can add it to we have a requirement now on the lettering and the rates, et cetera, that could be added to that ordinance.
And some type of
makes that
a city
happen.
seal sign, not the city seal, City of Los Angeles, but something that shows that they're in compliance with finance, they're in compliance with the standard, so the person driving down the street, or your folks or police officers, hey, this is a legitimate versus a bandit. And we did that for taxi cabs. At least we can identify those that are legit, those that aren't legit. Because there's no identifying marks as we see now on the signs. It's just the name of a parking lot. I'm just trying to find ways that we can narrow it down, narrow the pool down, and then go after those that are violating. And I'm sure that the parking industry would support something like that, to say, this is the good housekeeping seal of approval. So we need to look into that too, which would not be a huge expense. When they get their permit, that would be posted somewhere. I'm not talking about some big neon sign, but something small that we would be able to identify. The question on city attorney, we can have the city attorney come forward now. We've had the police commission, the finance, now the city attorney. The city attorney handles the charges, so at what point does the city attorney file charges? Any involvement with the DA's office to help us collect the money and prosecute folks that are stealing from the taxpayers of L.A.?
Chair, before we segue to city
Yes,
attorney, may I just mention one thing as a point of clarification?
Sure.
Councilmember Englander, you mentioned the fact that the discussion was morphing into branching out into wider discussion. I just wanted to point out that the original council file and the recommendations that Finance made to this committee as well as to the full council included a host of recommendations ranging from not only the revenue control equipment, again, for delinquent operators, but also a bond requirement, also addressing those operators that are not permitted, those operators that are delinquent in terms of addressing the renewal and non-renewal, because again, Finance does not have the authority to deny renewal. However, again, the action that we're taking with CID, we've taken steps to address that. So yes, what's on the agenda is limited, but the recommendation that we made in the original council file are much more expansive.
Right, that's true. And then the fact that you folks are working with the police department plugs a big gap that was there prior. So now the city attorney, who has the responsibility to follow up and put these people away?
Yes, Beverly Cook, Assistant City Attorney, and I head the Public Finance Department. To answer your question specifically, we will file on any matters that are referred to our department by the Office of Finance. The $23 million that's represented on your chart was the compilation of all of the outstanding parking occupancy tax cases that we had filed through several months ago. But we don't file those cases until they're actually referred. Right now, it's a civil matter. It is not handled as a criminal matter, although we did have one particular case that we criminally prosecuted. We had one parking operator that we prosecuted criminally. The problem that we had was we filed from a criminal standpoint initially and then later filed civilly, and what happened was it took an inordinate amount of time before we completed the criminal process. And because of due process and protections that are afforded someone who's subject to criminal prosecution, we could not really quickly proceed with the civil action. We did ultimately end up with a criminal conviction with restitution. I think we're being paid at the great rate of $4,000 a month on several million dollars, but that's the restitution order. We have an outstanding civil judgment in that same matter for, I believe it's for $3 million. So we did eventually receive a judgment, and we are receiving restitution, but it certainly was not something that we would enjoy having to do again criminally, simply because the process took such a long time. And it was because there were writs and a whole number of other things that had to take place before we could ultimately get to the trial in that matter. In terms of referring the matter to the DA's office, no, we don't, because that is all criminal prosecution. And generally speaking, we attempt to collect civil judgments in the civil proceeding, but we are pursuing, as Ed mentioned, piercing the corporate veils, because we do have a number of the parking operators who run around and they change names. We get a judgment against them and they change names. We get a judgment against them, they file bankruptcy. We enter into a settlement agreement, they won't sign it. We have been in court any number of times with just a few of the parking operators, and they seem to fill up the time because they have a scheme. It's not all, it's not many, but certainly the ones who are going to take us to task do.
So if we have a bond, as been recommended, they can play all the games they want, we collect on that bond.
That's the theory. That's the theory. And just one thing I want to caution. Ed mentioned that the bond discussion is part of the overall motion. Unfortunately, we have the Brown Act, and the Brown Act restricts us to what's really been stated, so everyone has notice of what we're going to discuss, and that's my concern about the limitations. But I can answer your question, yes, and we'll follow up. We're perfectly willing. We'd like to get this going. Frankly, I think it would be something that would be worthwhile.
I know there was an omission, unfortunately, on the agenda, so we will correct that. So if we credit card, this and that, the other. I mean, the goal is, have we ever thought about, being a creative idea, two or more conspire to commit an unlawful act as a felony? When we talk about them taking the dollars, it's not like we're taxing them. They're collecting our money and holding it hostage. Have we ever gone after them on a criminal aspect without a lot of pomp and circumstance and arrest them for conspiracy? That they're, we're not talking $20 or $30. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars on a conspiracy charge.
We had not considered that. We certainly will look at it, and I'll make sure that our folks talk to the criminal side of our office, because I believe that discussion was held today to have the criminal side take a look at these issues. And I should point out that unfortunately, when CID does go out to arrest, the information that we get back, it's the operator, the person who's been hired at 9 $9 or $10 per hour that we're getting. We're not getting the owners.
Right.
They're not there. They won't talk to us. They won't talk to CID about who told them to go there. So our job just becomes much more difficult to trace it and try and get to that operator. Were they hired there? And they will say, no, they know nothing. They don't know why they're there. They don't know who they give the money to. They have no ideas.
Yeah.
And frankly, if they lose their jobs with the state of the economy, they'll have somebody in the next day who's totally different. And so we're continually only arresting the operators, the person who really is not ultimately responsible for what's really going on there. We're adding a fraud cause of action, and we're certainly looking at piercing corporate veils in those circumstances where we think there's a misuse.
Mr. Engler?
I just wanted to, in thinking about one of the things that Mr. Koretz had brought up, which is we're becoming a cashless society. And the idea that he'd suggested that we require credit cards at these, you know, it's fascinating. Southwest Airlines doesn't take cash anymore when you fly. And they tell you that. I just flew recently on a trip, and they said that if you wanted to buy a beverage, we don't any longer accept cash at all. And with the handhelds on credit card devices, I just saw, in fact, the other day, I think it was at Best Buy, for $9.99. $9.99. You plug it into your iPhone, and you swipe your credit card, and you can download the software right when you plug it in. It downloads the software for free. You set it up through the bank, and you can take a credit card on your iPhone. And so there's all kinds of ways now. We're looking at handheld devices as one thing at a cost of $15,000 per lot, and again, going after good operators. That's expensive. But the idea to require certain lots of certain sizes, perhaps looking at in the future, I think Mr. Koretz had a great idea on that. While that's not agendized, and looking at if we could bring that back, when we bring back, add that to it with the bond idea, ways to be proactive rather than reactive and punitive. It would also, I would believe, help the local lot operators because they wouldn't then have to install all this equipment. They would know that if they go to a credit card only or ATM type machine only or something like that, they wouldn't have folks that are operating, that are working for them at $10 an hour and collecting all this cash. They wouldn't have to worry about them pocketing the money. And obviously makes it a lot easier for audit purposes for the city. And so, you know, most people do operate, and a lot of people are going in that direction with no cash. And so I'd like to look at that if you were still interested. You brought it up, and I thought it was fantastic. So,
Or at a minimum, the credit cards are accepted.
well, a minimum accepted, but at a maximum, maybe you have to have it over a certain amount of dollars or cars or spaces. We can look at, you know, breaking it up different ways.
We've got some public speakers, so if we can have you folks step aside, we'll bring these up three at a time, and then we will close out with the recommendations. Ann Williams, Greg Spiker, Robert Hindle. They'll be our first three folks. Come forward, please. All three. 1, 2, 3. Somebody's not here. Everybody's here. And we got 4 after you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann Williams with the Central City Association, representing nearly 450 businesses, and the Downtown Center Business Improvement District, representing over 1,000 property owners in downtown Los Angeles. We believe that there are already lots of tools at the city's disposal that can help it collect parking taxes, and that adding yet another tool, one that the private sector is being asked to pay for, will not efficiently achieve the desired result. I also want you to know that many of our affected property owners and parking operators are not fully aware of the proposal. It's the property owners who would bear the cost of installing this equipment, and they need to be part of that discussion. For example, for smaller surface parking lots, it may not make financial sense for the owner to pay for installation of permanent revenue control devices, and so our concern is that some of these lots might close down altogether, which would create a dead spot on the street and encourage blight and crime. This effect could significantly impact our efforts to revitalize communities like downtown Los Angeles. We plan to raise this issue before you at our bid board meeting tomorrow morning, but we need more time to get to alert our members and get feedback. We support the city in trying to maximize the tax revenues that it is owed, but we ask that you take the time to work with the industry to develop a meaningful solution that won't unnecessarily raise costs and ultimately the parking rates that the public will pay. To that end, we'd suggest convening a task force that could study the issue and the effects on the parking industry and report back in, say, 60 or 90 days. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rich, go ahead. The next one would be Mr. Spiker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Greg Spiker, Ken Spiker and Associates, representing the Los Angeles Parking Association. I just want to say, first of all, we would concur with the comments made by the representative of the CCA. Our members represent about 70% or operate about 70% of the parking lots here in Los Angeles, some of the biggest operators in the United States. And I do want to thank the Office of Finance and Executive Director TFINC and their staff. We've worked with them for several years, and particularly on the permitting process, and which has streamlined that for our members, which has been a great benefit to our membership, and we thank the City of LA as well. We just wanted to be, we're here today, and there's a number of our members here that are represented here in the audience that are going to speak before you. We're very happy that there's a healthy discussion going on here. There's a lot of money that should be collected from this, that's outstanding. But, you know, our membership is in good standing with the City of Los Angeles. We're the, the operators.
He doesn't have to stand when he shows that, by the way.
Yeah. Our members are permitted, they pay the POT, but it's unfortunate, but there's some operators out there that are skirting the law and getting around it, and it creates an unfair competitive advantage for our membership. So we are, just to be clear, opposed to mandating it all, you know, throughout all the lots. We don't think that's the proper approach. I think we could live with you know, hybrid approach where those delinquent operators, the ones that aren't paying their fair share or underreporting or don't have the proper permits, that's some type of a handheld device or even the permanent equipment, although the cost of the permanent equipment is prohibitive. But if it's a delinquent member, that's one thing. But our membership feels that you know, they're operating in good standing. We shouldn't go out and penalize them unnecessarily. So.
Okay. What do you think about the sign, the logo, or some kind of, that they're in compliance?
It's not a bad idea. That's something we would like to explore with you. And one thing I just want to mention, if we would certainly like to come back with some of our own ideas and work with both the Office of Finance and CID to come back with some additional recommendations along these lines. The bond issue is an interesting issue, although I think now the city requires a bond, but it's a small amount. I don't think the city has ever tapped into one of those bonds, to my knowledge, to this point.
Well, only a few have caused the havoc for the good people, as we know, 70% versus 30%.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Robert?
Yes, good afternoon, council members. My name is Bob Hindle. I'm the chairman of the Los Angeles Parking Association. I'm also the vice president with Parking Concepts. We are a parking facility operator and happen to be city contractor. I really just wanted to clarify some things, not really repeat what I'm sure other folks are going to say in a couple of minutes. This letter from Office of Finance dated October 19th and states that they appreciate the Parking Association supporting the position of automating all parking lots, and that is not our position, never was. I don't know how that got characterized that way. It must have been a miscommunication. Our several meetings with Director TFINC in regards to enforcement, what we could support and where we ended up after, like I said, several meetings, was the imposition of control procedures on the scofflaw operators or the repeat offenders, the chronic abusers, if you will. As an association, we support that 100%. We cannot support automating all of the parking facilities. It's not practical. I don't believe it's doable or necessary. And I know Los Angeles is constantly being referred to the San Francisco market as far as the parking control. We hear that a lot. Other cities hear about San Francisco. Los Angeles is a much different market than San Francisco. The San Francisco market has a few centralized business districts, and it's a much smaller geographical area. the city of LA would be much more difficult to impose automation. And what would happen is many parking lots would be taken out of inventory. Some of the marginal lots would simply disappear. Automation would really be a significant job killer, for sure. If you're going to impose the automation, the company's going to fully automate, and that's going to cost a lot of jobs, mainly for the people that can least afford it.
Okay, thank you. Our next three, Richard, looks like Robbins, Kerry Wolk, Richard Dane, and there'll be one after that.
My name is Richard Robbins. I'm here on behalf of KWD Investments, which is an owner, but I also deal regularly with parking companies. In fact, I've dealt with the city attorney's office in a number of parking-related matters, and I've been doing this for a long time, approaching 30 years. I don't think, and I know most of these parking companies that have appeared here today, and they're good companies, and they're compliant, and I don't think anybody's opposed to compliance. $23 million is a lot of money, and you should collect it. But as I'll get into a little later, there are a lot of tools available to you that you guys haven't explored yet. I think the panel's done a good job probing into the issues and what you can do, and there are a lot of things you can do that you've mentioned and things beyond, I think, what you've mentioned. The proposal on the table really just punishes the compliant companies or the compliant owners or the public. There's been a lot of discussion about alternatives. You've talked about credit cards. You know, there's a 3 to 6% fee for credit card. Who's going to pay that? When you have credit cards exiting, you know, in Southwest, a drink might be $3 or $6 or, if you have too many drinks, $12. But they'll have time to deal with that. Parking doesn't have time to deal with it. And someone's going to have to take the risk that, you know, those are deadbeats that are paying. Who's going to take that risk? I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm saying you need to really spend time dealing with it and addressing those issues. The revenue control equipment you're talking about isn't going to solve the problem. It's going to take the audit you have now and change the nature of the audit. Right now, most of the clients use, you know, employees. If they don't have revenue control equipment, they give out time and date-stamped tickets. They have to account for them. You've got outside auditors that have come in and looked at most of these companies and not found big dollars that were due. They use mystery shoppers to ferret out fraud. It works pretty well. They know that these companies are compliant. If you listen to the city attorney and you listen to the Department of Finance, they've told you that. They know that these companies are compliant. The reason they're going to be opposed to it is they're the ones that are going to bear the cost. Either they bear it, or the owners bear it, or the public bears it. And at the end of the day, what will happen is a lot of these smaller lots are just going to be out of business. You're going to have some more adverse consequences. You're going to have business suffer from it. You know, these lots serve a purpose, and you certainly should collect the tax. Now, you asked the question about, can you put liens on the property? Has anyone attempted to go out and do fraudulent conveyance suits against those that were responsible? Councilman Zine, you talked about conspiracy theories. It's a real good idea. You know, if you commit a fraudulent conveyance in the city of Los Angeles, or actually in the state, I think it's a misdemeanor. To the extent people are involved, you're able to go after them, but I don't think the city's attempted to do it. You can go after temporary restraining measures. You can have a TRO. You can have receivers put in. Have you ever attempted to do it? No one's done it as far as we know. Why not? The people that need to be punished are the people that are the wrongdoers, the scofflaws, as you call them. Frankly, and I'll just say this as a member of the public, I'm not even sure why you're dealing with scofflaws. You asked the question about, and apparently there's a problem with dealing with new entities that are set up. Why not dig down and find out who you're dealing with and focus on that? And if the law doesn't allow you to do it, change the law and allow yourselves to do it. If you find someone hasn't paid, don't wait 9 months. Go in and get a temporary order from the court and put a receiver in and collect the money. I got to tell you, that's going to solve your problem right away if you can do it. To the extent that you can go after companies that owe you money, but they've hidden it by giving it to relatives or friends, and it goes on all the time, go after them. If the city attorney can do it, have the city attorney do it. If the city attorney can't do it, get outside counsel to do it. Maybe you can get them to do it on some sort of percentage basis. I know the Comptroller's Office looked at that. Those are measures that work. So what you're dealing with is a situation where you have the tools available to you, you just haven't used them. Okay. And if you do it, I think you solve your problems, and you don't have to deal with this, which is a very, very expensive way to solve a problem that really doesn't exist. I heard the Department of Finance talk about how you've solved a lot of the problems because you've become more proactive.
Okay, sir. Okay, you're way past time, and we've got like 5 minutes left. Harry Walt.
I think a lot of what I was going to say has been said, but as operators, remember, 10% belongs to you, but 90% belongs to us. We know how to audit. We know how to go look for this ourselves. The tools do exist already, and the city needs to use the tools that are already in place. The fact is, on the revenue control equipment, and believe me, everyone in this room is for compliance. We've all lost parking lots to operators that we know are not compliant. It's a disadvantage for us. So that said, we are 100% for it. The equipment is going to give the city a false sense of security. The same people that are cheating now are going to beat the system in any way that they can with the equipment. It is not an end-all. It is not fail-safe. It's been proven time and time again. We as operators have found the same problems with the equipment. We have to be on top of it every day, every moment, every second. So blind reliance thinking that equipment is going to solve, it's the same people are going to be doing the same things, just a different audit trail.
Okay, thank you. Richard Dane.
Hi, Richard Dane. I operate a company called Paragon Parking. I have 10 locations in the city of Los Angeles. 8 of those locations are surface lots, and they're 120 spaces all the way down to 25 spaces. Quite frankly, I don't know how I'd be able to put equipment in on the smaller lots. It would probably cost me income. In addition to the expense of the equipment, it would probably cost me income, which would cost the city tax money as well, because the income in the lot would be less because I wouldn't have as much room to park the vehicles. Also, I think that what Carrie said needs to be expounded upon, and that is that the operators that are currently cheating are the operators that are going to continue to cheat. And when the equipment goes into place, all of us who have our ways of dealing with the theft issues and everything else in the lot and reporting issues are doing that stuff correctly now. The operators who are cheating are just simply going to continue to cheat. They're going to, as the gentleman said earlier, they're just simply going to lift the gates, or they're not going to issue the tickets. They're going to do what they do right now, even if they have the equipment. And there's no safeguards that says that they're going to operate in any other fashion.
Okay, thank you. David Damas?
Thank you for your time. It's been a great discussion. My name is David Damas. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of System Property Development Company. We've owned, operated, and been in Los Angeles since 1920 as a parking operator. And
you don't look that old.
I wasn't that old, but sometimes it feels that way. A couple of quick points. One is that regardless of what type of plan you go with, you really need to consider exempting smaller lots, less than 50. There's 300 lots that have less than 50 cars. It's unworkable. It's cost prohibitive. It would kill a lot of the good small businesses to try to go after the bad. Second, parking tickets. There's a thing called a 3-part ticket. It's really easy to audit. You have a ticket on the car, you keep one, you can audit one. I won't go into it, but it's a great way without technology to have enforceable audits. Tickets have to be maintained for IRS purposes as well. Last is enforcement. Look, the bad operators, they don't pay the parking tax, they don't pay the wage taxes, they don't pay the workers' comp tax. So, and it's amazing to me that we have this huge discussion and we don't collect 100% of what was stolen from the city. We don't collect and fully try to go after these guys. They get off for pennies on the dollar. And today, as I drove in, they're still operating today. And that should be the focus of going after these folks and collecting all of the money that's owed, as well as not throwing out the good operators with the bad. Last, I'd say that the Parking Association is here to help. And we really want meaningful input because we're committed to downtown and the community. San Francisco has high density. It has some of the highest parking rates in the country. We can't afford to do that to retail and other civic centers. And so last, I would ask that you get more input from good places like the CCA and the BID and the Parking Association. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, that sums it up with a public comment and our other folks that were here. So what we're going to do is continue this matter for 45 days in this committee, direct the city attorney with the assistance of Office of Finance, CAO, Mr. T. Fank with the Police Department, Commission Investigation, to draft language to amend our Los Angeles Municipal Code 103.202 to require that all new and existing parking lot operators follow what you folks in the next 45 days will come up with. And that is a wide variety of issues, including issues such as possible bond identification, and to require from the operators, current, future, ways to plug the holes that we've discovered. So I'm going to leave it pretty open for you. We want the city attorney, with the assistance of Office of Finance, to draft language to amend LAMC Section 103.202 to require any parking lot operators who have been delinquent in their parking and occupancy tax. And we have a minimum of time on that. We will discuss the minimum of time to install, and those delinquent is what we're referring to, not the other folks that are in compliance, permanent type revenue control equipment as a condition of renewing their permit. And that would apply to those who are the scaffolds who have not been in compliance. Some of the other items that have been discussed, I'm sure the association will be happy to work with the City Attorney's Office, Office of finance, Mr. T-Fank, my office, and in 45 days to come up with an ordinance that we can amend this 103.202 to satisfy these issues. I'm not in favor, I don't know if my colleague, Mr. Koretz, I know Mr. Englander is not in favor of penalizing those legitimate operators, but what we want to do, and what really insults me and the taxpayers, is when someone's collecting money for you and keeping that money and not giving you the money that is rightfully yours, meaning the city's, that is highly offensive. This isn't like we're taking money out of their pocket. This is money that the people who are using those lots are paying as a tax to give to the city, and these other folks who obviously aren't here are stealing that money. So what we want to do is leave it with that ordinance 103.202, but let's put in that with the assistance, and we will have you folks included in that discussion that comes back to 45 days, where we can include all these items. And they will, at that particular time, hopefully come up with a vote that we can take it forward. We have issues regarding the credit card, issues that we just mentioned, the three-way parking ticket, the issue regarding the signs that were posted to show it's a legitimate operator. So all of those issues we can put into that idea and how we can amend this ordinance to satisfy those needs and those concerns. And that, I think, resolves all of the issues that are before us today, in addition to the suggestions that have been made that are not on the agenda. Mr. Koretz.
Can we add the possibility of looking at size cutoffs as well, I think?
Yes, yes.
Permanent equipment might make sense, but if you have a 10-space lot, you might as well just shut them down.
Well, permanent equipment only, we're all talking about permanent equipment for those who have not lived up to their obligation.
Right, but if you're a scofflaw and you have a 10-space lot, it's still not going to make sense to put in $50,000 pieces of equipment, so they should at least be looking at some cutoffs there also.
Well, but I don't have a lot of sympathy for scofflaws. Those that want to violate that, I mean, if they have a 10-lot, I think the requirement is 8 to have some type of a control. We're either going to be tough on those that have been violating and not paying their fee to the city that they're collecting, or we're going to be lenient. And I think that let the working group come up with that, if you think that there's an idea for that. But I think if we hadn't had those folks committing those violations, we wouldn't be here discussing this. We wouldn't have the $23 million that's not in the city treasurer, and the finance with the limited resources, because every department, finance, city attorney, you name the department, they've all been cutting personnel, and as the budget continues to show a deficit, there may be more furloughs and more cutbacks. Meanwhile, that's money that is due the people of Los Angeles to provide services. So for the finance folks, we will have these folks work with you, with the city attorney, with Mr. T-Fank, and that way you're a part of it, the Central City Association. So if you have an idea you want to generate, it'll be part of that. They'll come back here, we'll hash it through, and then we will go forward to the council. But we can't continue to ignore it, as it's been ignored for a long, long time, and we want to come to an end with it and make it reasonable, make it work for everyone. So again, we don't want to jeopardize the legitimate folks, the 70+%, but those 30%, and as the gentleman testified, some are still in operation today. and we need to make an aggressive stance so that doesn't continue. I know when I go to Washington, D.C., you don't see bandit taxi cabs. You come to Los Angeles, you see bandit taxi cabs all over the place. It's the tolerance that we will accept, and when it comes to this, we're not going to accept any level of noncompliance. So with that, we will bring it back in 45 days. So that'll be the recommendation, the approval from this committee, and we are now adjourned. Thank you.